It's June 2nd, 2022. This is Rook. Hi there, welcome to episode 182 of Rook. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. Hope you're keeping well, wherever you're tuning in from around the world. Hello to you from Toronto, from Canada. Salam Dustan Aziz, Durud Bar Shoma. Hello to you, Groovy Shaya.
Hi, Aziza.
And hello to you, Smart Pega.
Hello.
Oh, get closer to the microphone.
Oh.
Right, right into the microphone.
Okay.
Hello, Smart Pega.
Hello. How are you?
Thank you. I'm well. You are in the Captain Reza spot. It's a Thursday, so we have you here.
Yes.
And although you're not a captain.
No, not yet.
Oh, I see. Right. I was going to say, how do you become a captain? But basically, we start calling you that at some point.
I guess.
Let's see. Actually, Captain Pega has a nice ring to it, but Reza would probably be very upset with that. Are Iranians lousy at dialogue? So here's the proposition. We are a global community that seems to have trouble with productive and nuanced conversation. You know, Hushenga Tozi was on the show on Monday, and he was talking about this. It seems to constantly come up, in fact. We've been talking about this for some time, but certainly when it comes to, say, opposition politics in the diaspora or different opinions on a nuclear deal or so-called friendly soccer games between Iran and Canada, things quickly descend into screaming matches or polemics where no side is allowed to admit any fallibility, and we have trouble with dialogue. Mm-hmm. Yes. That's the proposition, and you guys agree with this, I know. Absolutely. Because we've been talking about this as a team. So I really wanted to keep a dialogue going, if we can, about the difficulties we seem to have. And this is at a larger society level, in politicized social media debates, and in intimate relationships or family gatherings. Dialogue continues to seem to be a challenge for Iranians, at least when it comes to openness and honesty and transparency and tolerance. Like I say, this comes up on our show a lot. So we've got Dr. Soroush Dabbagh coming up. He's an Iranian philosopher, a scholar, an author, a therapist, and he's examined these issues a lot, both as a psychologist and a philosopher. So looking forward to having him joining us in just a few moments. You know, I was thinking, just as we were about to start the show here, I was thinking, are Iranians lousy at dialogue? Even the question, I feel like it would be, I might think it's an insult if I heard somebody non-Iranian say it. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, our Iranians almost sounds snarky, like we're not. But you know, if it's amongst, if we're talking to other Iranians about this situation, I would say it's pretty obvious. Mm-hmm. And by dialogue, we don't mean that we're not enthusiastic about talking, because Iranians certainly seem to like to talk a lot. Yeah. There's no shortage of talking. It's more, I looked up the definition of dialogue: a conversation between two or more people, okay? Mm-hmm. Or as a verb, to take part in a conversation or discussion to resolve a problem.
Oh.
That's where the problem comes up.
Yeah, so when I say, are Iranians lousy at dialogue, Pega, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Absolutely,
yes.
Yeah, and why is that?
I mean, I think part of it is, actually I thought about...
Not why is it in terms of giving a prescription, but just why do you think absolutely yes immediately?
Well, the one thing that I got reminded of was the conversation with Dr. Shaybani from last week, where she talks about combative language. And that actually really came to the forefront of my mind when I saw this title, because I think it's true. We get very combative, and we're not taught to have proper dialogue.
Uh-huh. Like what's an example of what you mean?
Well, just getting defensive as opposed to actually listening.
Right.
Yeah, we are. I think. Sorry to jump in. I think we are either passive or aggressive in our dialogue.
Yes.
There's no mid ground.
We don't choose to be passive aggressive, although we're that as well.
Yes.
But either passive or aggressive. Yes, defensive. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the context in which she was talking about combative language. Do you remember what?
Yeah, she was saying that she was referring to the evolution of language, and she was saying that more recently the conversation, or I guess the language, has become more combative, even in social media, even in culture, so music, things like that. We tend to be more combative in the way that we speak, and that really stuck with me then. And even in regards to the conversation of dialogue, I can definitely relate to that. I think that's exactly the case.
Do you have an example of combative language?
I mean, the soccer match, the conversation surrounding.
So it's not just the words we use, but how it goes to 100
exactly
right away. It's just everybody's on guard. Everyone's got their ammunition ready and shooting at each other kind of verbally.
Yeah, and part of it is that I also think that we're not great at listening. So everyone's just ready to kind of jump in, but not really listen.
Well, and what I want to talk to Dr. Dabbagh about is, I mean, nuance too. There just doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite in some cases for nuance. The thing is, this it really comes up on our show a lot. It would seem like some funny sort of, stereotype or idea that we're conjuring up to have a discussion about today. But there's barely a week that goes by without somebody making a comment about the dysfunctionality of Persians with each other when it comes to communication and dialogue. And on a more intimate and personal level too, right? Not just political debates or whatever. We when we had our psychologists on a couple of months ago talking about intimate relationships and love, they just over and over again kept saying, but the number one issue in Persian relationships, lack of communication, lack of honesty. And then let's get started. I mean, we'll have to, I don't know if Dr. Dabbagh will bring it up, or we'll have to talk about Tarof as well, because that by its very nature is dialogue that you don't mean, saying things that intentionally that you don't necessarily mean. I mean, that's like embedded in our culture, it's expected that we're just going to say things that are basically lies to each other.
And actually, I was going to jump in and add one more thing. I think also our culture puts in like sayings and different ways of trying to twist what we're trying to say. So we don't ever talk directly, but we try to speak more indirectly. And I think that
some people call that poetic.
It is, and it could be. It definitely could be, but I think it also leads to miscommunication sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. And then to add on top of this, and I really want to bring this up with Dr. Dabbagh, because Soroush Dabbagh is big on Clubhouse. He's got like thousands of followers, right? I mean, I don't.
Once I saw that how 20,000 people attended one of his.
Well, this is a funny thing, because the Clubhouse anomaly when it comes to Iranians and Persians is so fascinating to me. First of all, Clubhouse is pretty much dead as a social media platform for almost any other community. I mean, it's in the West, you don't really. It's not like. I don't know, famous actors or politicians. I'll be announcing this on Clubhouse. I mean, it's almost absurd. It's known as this platform that got big during the pandemic and then died, but not for Iranians. No. It's huge for Iranians, which, in the context of our question today around dialogue, is kind of a funny thing, because Clubhouse ostensibly is all about dialogue. Yes. Not necessarily good dialogue. That's the problem, I guess.
It's just because we like hearing ourselves talk. Or it could be.
Right. Yeah. You're not including the three of us.
No,
in
absolutely
your indictment of,
No, strictly referring to Clubhouse.
To be honest with you, the only social media that I'm still subscribed to is Clubhouse.
And why is that?
Because, sometimes when there is a good dialogue, it's really informative and you can enjoy listening with Soroush Dabbagh. I've been in some of his rooms and you can learn. Literally, you can learn instead of watching reels on TikTok. I prefer to go to Clubhouse and
we should explain that part of the reason why Clubhouse is popular for Iranians is because it is a sanctuary of sorts. It is a place to go, maybe not a sanctuary, but a place where dialogue can happen in a sea of other platforms that are interfered with or cracked down upon or edited or suppressed or whatever. So it's kind of become this beacon of some form of free speech that doesn't exist otherwise in media for Iranians, especially for Iranians who inside Iran communicating with Iranians outside of Iran, right?
Yeah.
So that's a positive element of Clubhouse. I feel like I've been inactive on Clubhouse because it just more, and I'm sure there's amazing rooms that you're talking about. Maybe I should go check them out again, but it always seemed to descend into nonsense, to a certain extent. I wasn't leaving conversations learning a lot. Some cases I was early on, but
I thought it's interesting that Shaya was saying when the room is good or when the dialogue is good, so as to, I guess it's not always, or most often it's not. And I think that's the experience that I had with Clubhouse. Was I went into it thinking, oh, this is great, it's such a great platform, it gives everyone the ability to really voice their opinions or have that open dialogue. But more often than not, I felt it wasn't conducive to anything, really.
Well, because Soroush Dabbagh is so big on Clubhouse and because he studies these things, I'll be curious to get his take on whether he thinks it's a positive platform for, I'm assuming he does because he's so active on it, that it's positive for Iranians, and where that fits into this question of whether we're lousy at dialogue or not. We are coming to you on rookmedia.com. It's there that you can link to all of our platforms. So we're on this ongoing mission to build a new audiovisual encyclopedia of Iranian diaspora identity. We are on Spotify, SoundCloud, Castbox, Apple Podcasts, Instagram. If you like to see your visuals with Rook, switch over to YouTube. And if you like your Rook descriptions and bulletins in English and in Persian, you can check us out on Telegram. And we do encourage you to go to our website, rookmedia.com. That's the hub of all things Rook, all of our episodes, all of our previous guests, our funnies, the contemporary history of Iran episodes. All of that is at rookmedia.com, where you can also press the Support Us button to become a patron for just a little bit each month to support what we do here. We crowdsource, and that's really appreciated. Hey, if you have not been to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto, have you been, Pegah?
I have not, actually.
All right. Well, if you have not been to the Museum of Contemporary Art, the MoCA, as we might know it, this is a pretty good time for you to visit. Right now, at the MoCA Toronto, is an exhibit entitled Shirin Neshat, Land of Dreams. Have you heard about this?
I have heard about it.
And you haven't gone?
I haven't had the chance, but it's definitely on my list.
Well, if you've not been to the MoCA, Pegah, lots of folks listening may know of Shirin Neshat, an Iranian visual artist. She is, of course, known for her work in film and video and photography. She's one of the great artists of our community. This is her first major exhibition in Canada in 20 years. It sees the convergence of photography and film, bringing together a range of work in one immersive experience. This is stemming from her perspective as an Iranian immigrant living and working in the United States. Land of Dreams focuses on global issues of displacement, migration, and geopolitical conflict. It's running till the end of July. You want to check this out if you are in the Toronto area. The central work that gives the exhibition its title comprises over 100 photographic portraits and a video installation converging photography and film into that immersive experience. And it is presenting a perspective, I should say, on contemporary America. Shirin Neshat, Land of Dreams, at the MoCA, Toronto, until July 31st, 2022. Do check it out. All right, we've got our guest lined up.
Yes,
we're going to bring our guest in. So we'll talk more on the other side. Thank you, Smart Pegah, Groovy Shaya. If there is an ongoing message or issue we have encountered when it comes to the Iranian community in doing this program for the last couple of years. It's about dysfunction as a product of lack of communication, both in a larger societal level, in politicized social media debates, and in intimate relationships or family gatherings. Dialogue continues, it would seem, to be a challenge for Iranians, at least when it comes to openness, honesty, transparency, and tolerance. At the same time, the social media platform Clubhouse, that is all about dialogue, has become a big boon to Iranians around the world long after its popularity has waned amongst other communities. What does that say about Iranians and the desire to talk to each other? Well, we thought we would turn to someone who has examined these issues, both as a psychologist and as a philosopher, and someone who happens to be very popular on Clubhouse at present as well. My guest today is Iranian philosopher, scholar, author, and therapist Dr. Soroush Dabbagh. Dr. Dabbagh is known for his expertise in contemporary philosophy, religious reform, and mysticism. He was born and raised in Tehran. He's the son of one of the most influential figures in the religious intellectual movement in Iran, Dr. Abdul Karim Soroush. Dr. Soroush Dabbagh received his pharmacy doctorate from Tehran University of Medical Science in 1998. He got his PhD in philosophy from Warwick University in England, and he's a postdoctoral fellow from the Historical Studies Department at the University of Toronto. He got his master's in counseling psychology from Yorkville University in Canada. He has published numerous books and articles on moral philosophy, philosophy of religion, mysticism, and religious intellectuality, both in Persian and in English. And right now, Dr. Soroush Dabbagh joins me from Mississauga, Canada. Hello, sir.
Hello, Jian. Yeah, thanks for your invitation.
You know, I'm somewhat exhausted from reading all of your degrees. Do you think you have enough now? How many PhDs and masters does one man need?
I think enough is enough. Yeah.
So, you know, there are so many things. First of all, I've been looking forward to having you on the program, and I thank you so much for making the time to do this. There are so many things that we could talk to you about, and I'm already thinking I want to invite you back to talk to you about religious reform, for example. But we thought we'd talk today about dialogue, and in fact have an open dialogue, if we can, you and I, about our community and communication. And let me start with a very general question, and that I'm curious to see how you will answer. What do you believe the greatest issue is facing the Iranian community? And when I speak about the Iranian community, I'm talking about Iranians in the diaspora around the world, and also perhaps Iranians in Iran who are listening as well. What do you believe the greatest issue is facing the Iranian community when it comes to dialogue and intra-community communication today?
Okay, well, let me start in this way. Thanks for the question which you raised. As far as I can see, and based upon my lived experience, both inside Iran and outside Iran, I can see lack of communication in a way is something which is missing and in a way needs to be improved and highlighted and trained. By lack of communication, I mean something which is missing here. I can refer to it as critical thinking, something which actually has not been trained, let's say, within us and has not been distributed. Generally speaking, critical thinking in terms of how, let me put it this way, Socratic questions, truth and falsity, justification, and going beyond certainty, going beyond the point that I am entirely true, and acquiring the capacity of listening actively to others, because dialogue is associated with active listening. It's not just the point that I'm talking to you or you are talking to me and I'm going to be silent and just wanted to prove my point again without listening and without caring to what you're saying. Okay, so active listening and kind of embracing to what is being said and try to make intelligible and try to put forward my own arguments and be does believe that, I mean, my ideas are tentative and it contains truth and falsity. It's not the case that I am entirely right, I'm entirely true. So this is what I mean by lack of communication, or let's say lack of education. Lack of education is more important.
I hear you on the critical thinking, and I want to get. I'm going to ask you about that, but and in fact, I think it's quite profound that you point that out, because that maybe that's an underlying issue where it certainly doesn't feel like that's socialized into the Iranian community, although questioning things, or sort of an overall kind of cynicism or skepticism does exist, but not necessarily in the form of critical thinking that feels like an educated questioning of ourselves, of concepts, of others. But can you just tell us how does critical thinking intersect with listening? I mean, it seems on the face of it, well, okay, so you're not adept at critical thinking, but why does that affect our ability to listen to our fellow Iranians?
Great. The way in which they are connected together, as far as I can see, is this: that when I do believe in critical thinking, and I do believe what I'm saying, that I do believe, I mean something which is internalized already within my mind and psyche. So as a result, I do believe that my points and ideas are tentative. It means that it could be true, it could not be true. And even I don't know what about the weakness of my argument and claim. So in this way, embracing others, let's say, I mean, let me utilize one phrase from one of the great 20th century philosophers, Emmanuel Levinas, the French philosopher. So the other and otherness is crucial in this way, and has got a constitutive role, let's say. When I do active listening, so I genuinely believe that your comments could correct me, not just the point that, okay, let him or let her talk about what does she believe. No.
Accepting the fact that you may actually be wrong.
Yeah. And accepting the point that my ideas could be fallible.
See, this is going to be something that a lot of people listening can relate to. The idea that that Iranians have trouble sometimes accepting that they're wrong. Where does that come from? Where did that start?
Well, it's not easy to answer this question. I mean, if you do ask me a historical question, but we could talk about it and just talk, for instance, as an example, some interpretation of religion in our culture, you could say, that paved the way for this kind of certainty, which is associated with dogmatism. But it's not just origins from religion and religiosity. We could search and we could find it both, I mean, in different subcultures in our community and Iranian atmosphere. But I mean, again, let me just one phrase: lack of training in terms of critical thinking, both amongst the religious and non-religious people, I think, has got a role in this regard.
I mean, I have to, apologize to you and those listening that with the breadth of this conversation, I mean, we're talking about a lot of things, and it's and part of an open dialogue means that we, it may not always be as focused as one. So I know when we're talking about communication and dialogue, there's a lot that fits under that category. One of the precipitants for wanting to have this conversation with you, and I hope it's an ongoing conversation with you and others that we have on this show, is we not too long ago had two psychologists here in our studio, Yasemin Karimi and Dabbagh, and we were talking about relationships. It was actually Valentine's Day, and we were talking about dysfunction in Iranian relationships. And almost every answer towards the end, they were just saying, well, we have a problem with communication. We have a problem with communication. We have a problem with communication in our relationships between men and women, between family members, etc. Would you go so far as to say this lack of training, as you said, or this lack of critical thinking affects the way a husband communicates with his wife, or a father and a son?
Yeah, I can see. Can you elaborate what you mean by that? That you
Well,
think
if
you're asking me that critical thinking affects this kind of daily, everyday, relationships?
exactly, yeah, because when you talk about critical thinking and lack of training, I'm thinking about how we don't, communicate our political ideas well enough, and we get dogmatic about them when we don't listen to each other, etc. But what about something as simple as, the lack of communication that happens inside a family and inside an Iranian family? Do we attribute that lack of communication to these issues as well, to these causes as well?
Yeah, we could do that, as far as I can see, because as a therapist, as you mentioned, I have seen this kind of lack of communication and just nothing trying to illustrate or clarify what we mean or what we expect from each other. At the bottom level, let me utilize this metaphor, co-travelers. As co-travelers, when we do authentic dialogue, we are heading ahead. The point of departure is clear, but the goal is not clear in advance. As co-travelers, we go hand in hand as far as authentic dialogue is concerned. But if I do not believe in this kind of, account of dialogue, so what could happen is that unhealthy emotion in terms of anger, in terms of sadness, even resentment, and so on and so forth, could pop up. This is what I have been watching. When I'm listening to Iranian dialogues within Clubhouse, it's just a matter of just proving each other, proving somebody's trying to do that. But this is not the purpose of dialogue. If it's authentic dialogue, and as I mentioned, as co-travelers, we are supposed to go ahead hand in hand.
Let me come back to Clubhouse, because I want to ask you specifically about it, and how it's become this phenomenon for the Iranian community in particular. But just 2 steps back, when you talk about authentic dialogue, it does feel, after a while, it gets a little reductive to blame everything on the revolution or big changes in Iranian society. But where does the revolution play a role here? Has open dialogue always been an issue for Iranians, or do you think it was amplified after 1979?
Yeah, after revolution and before revolution, both. But since this is the huge challenge, and this is the huge change, which happened in our contemporary Iran. Yeah, the revolutionary atmosphere, generally speaking, does not help to empower dialogue and authentic dialogue, which I mentioned, because it's associated with emotion, and it's associated with behavior and emotions, and go beyond, or let's say put down, critical thinking or rationality. This voice on that time had not been heard. We know, for instance, the late Bazargan, the first prime minister, on that time, Bazargan was more or less the only voice who wanted to upgrade, or let's say empower and increase the level of tolerance and democratic to behaving each other. But it didn't work on that time. It didn't work at the end of the day, and he resigned. And now we can see that it was the lack of communication, lack of education, and the emotional attitude towards things, which was associated with revolutionary approach. They marginalized some kind of democratic and tolerance-based approach like Bazargan and others. As you referred to revolution, this is the reason which I referred to that. Yes. Now, as far as I can see, at least in civil society, the situation has already changed. I'm not talking about the political leaders. No, still the jargon, the discourse of anti-West kind of revolutionary discourse is being talked about and utilized. But as far as civil society and plain people, this is the huge change in comparison with what was practiced at the beginning of revolution. In other words, at the beginning of revolution, even plain people, the majority of plain people, they were revolutionary as well. They didn't care about critical thinking at large. But now the situation is changed, and the education, though we talked about lack of education, but modern education, and I think their lived experience, the experience of revolution, different things has taught us in civil society to talk together in a better way, let's say, and in a more tolerant way in comparison with what had happened about 45 years ago, 50 years ago.
I I don't know if this, let me try it on you. I don't know if I'm being a bit silly here, but, philosophically, wouldn't the creation of a revolution be the ultimate paragon, the ultimate example of critical thinking? In other words, it's a collective of people saying, we were wrong, we want to change things, right?
So, no, it's not. I know what you mean and where you're coming from. But in revolution, something which is, what happens is fundamental and wanted to change all the way down. In terms of education, institutions, and so on and so forth. But critical thinking is associated with reform, which happens gradually and step by step. And what by we, I mean Iranian people, we experienced 45 years ago, it wasn't as an example of critical thinking, because it was a rush. They wanted to change everything all the way down.
There's not a lot of nuance to a revolution.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. That's true. This is the nature of revolutionary approach and the whole idea of revolution. Yeah, and for instance, if you compare historically speaking with another classical revolutions within, post Enlightenment and post Renaissance era, like French Revolution and Russian Revolution. In 18th century and 20th century, Iranian Revolution was another example of classical revolution, which something happened and all the way down, everything was changed. In French, in Russia, and in Iran, we could say that. So that was revolution, yeah. And of course, it was entirely different from critical thinking and trying to reform and change the things step by step and gradually. And let me add one thing, if I can do that now.
Please.
This is my own idea now. We know that there are a lot of people inside Iran and both outside Iran that they're not who are not happy with what is happening, economically speaking, culturally speaking, religiously speaking, socially speaking, and so on and so forth. But from my perspective, a lot of them has taken a lesson from the revolution which had happened about 45 years ago in Iran. The main lesson which they have taken is that, okay, revolution is not the solution necessarily, and it would be better just to go beyond revolution and revolutionary ideas. Put it aside, because we experienced that it didn't work. So why it would be doable and why it could change the situation in a good and constructive way again. And this is I could say, this is the biggest lesson, let's say, the most important lesson which the majority of people has taken from the revolution which happened 45 years ago.
Dr. Dabbagh, let me ask you about trust, because when we talk about lack of communication and Iranians digging into their opinions and not really listening to each other in debate or in social circles or in family matters or in broader society, this issue of lack of communication we're talking about, talk to me about the intersection of mistrust in that. And we often hear, again, these are generalizations that are made on this show, people talking about the Iranian community. I'm talking about Iranians here, not others talking about us. Talk about the fact that we don't trust each other. We have trust issues. Where does trust and issues of trust fit in with problems of dialogue and discourse?
Yeah, it makes sense, and it is to some extent relevant. I have to think about it more. But on the face of it, we do have a culture. I don't know the English exact for the Tarof.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Tarof, which
Yeah.
which is either a beautiful thing or the ultimate example of disingenuousness, just lying to
Yeah.
each other. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the Tarof here, let's say, has plays a role, let's say, in this regard, and kind of minimizing or at least weakening the transparency which is required to collaborate to get to work together in a collaborative way, or just to talk about the issues. So Tarof, which is, as I mentioned, against transparency, I think has a role here. And the historical pessimism, let's say, about especially after the revolution, I can see that where does he or she come from? When, for instance, in diaspora, I used to live in England when I was working on my PhD. I did live there for about 4 years and a half. And I, came across a lot of Iranian who were in diaspora and in Canada since 10, 11 years ago. And as you referred, I have seen several times that where does he or where does she come from? Does she relevant to the system, let's say, to government, let's say? And where does, for instance, his capital come from? So what I'm saying is that at least, in the recent 40, 50 years ago, though it was the case in the past as well, before the revolution, we have heard about Sauvage.
Yes.
And even whether or not he was Savaki or whether or not she was Savaki. So what I'm saying is that the mistrust which you mentioned has got a historical aspect as well. Apart from that, the Tarof, which is part of our culture and part of our behavior, collective behavior, has got a role as well. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of your role as a therapist or psychologist, does Tarof ever help? Is it ever a good thing? It seems like this extreme politeness, ritualized politeness that we have with each other. On the face of it, seems a very sweet thing, but do you ever see it actually as having a positive outcome in terms of the way we deal with each other?
Oh, well, sometimes it plays a positive role in terms of when you don't want to insult or you don't want to say something directly. As a result, somebody's getting upset, But generally, the negative outcomes of Tarof is much, much more than its positive outcomes.
Yeah, you don't know where people actually stand. We've talked about this before on this program, but even the first few times when I got into a cab with an Iranian cab driver and they said, "Qabel nadare," I was like, okay, really? And then I realized that if I actually don't pay the guy, he's going to, take a swing at me or something. They want to be paid, but this weird kind of language that we use with each other.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
Yeah, very strange. Yeah. I do agree with you. So this is what I'm saying, that being Rook, let's say, and clarity and transparency is going to work more at the end of the day. Yeah. And we do, as a therapist, we do have a cognitive distortion, which is called jumping to conclusion. Okay. And jumping to conclusion is what you think about. I'm thinking what Jian is thinking about me. And what about his, what my mind reading, let's say. So when we do use Tarof, mind reading, which is an example of jumping to conclusion, is highlighted, is increased, let's say. And we do think about each other when I'm, for instance, when I'm thinking about my relationship with you, when I'm at home alone. What did he mean by that?
Right.
Why he said so, why he behaved. And this is, it paved the way for doing, jumping to conclusion and mind reading, which could hurt our mental health and pushing us towards unhealthy relationships, which could affect our mental health in a destructive way.
Yes.
Yeah.
If my neighbor who has been in Canada for generations, as a Canadian, English sort of, who's been here for generations, says to me, "Oh, I'd love you to come over for a drink sometime this week." I don't necessarily question whether he means that or not. But if an Iranian says, "Oh, you must come over for a drink," if you said that to me right now, I would. You're right. I would, after the conversation, go, did he mean that, or was that Tarof, or should I actually accept the invitation, or would that be rude, or I mean, and that seems highly dysfunctional.
Yeah, I do agree with you. Yeah, this is a cultural issue, or let's say this is part of our cultural baggage. I think it would be better for us to do our best to decrease, or let's say minimize or lessen the level of Tarof and the amount of Tarof within our communications and relationships. Yeah, I do agree with you. And I have done, honestly, what I could do. I mean, especially in the last 5 years in this regard, just within my circle, community, and friends and colleagues, just to lessen the amount of decrease the amount of Tarof.
You mean you actively say, can we try to be less Tarofi? Let's to practice this less.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we have to start. I mean, in a collaborative way and just together, collectively. Don't you think so?
But I just don't know how you really. Yes, I do think so. But the problem is that there is some valor associated with Tarof. It's considered it's still got this. Some people really cherish it. I as much as they decry it, I know I have family members who appreciate it when somebody is very Tarofi, that's the confusing part that messes with your head. Yeah. It's like, well, do you really want us to lose it, or are you being Tarofi when you say don't be Tarofi?
Part of some social norms which needs to be revised, honestly and fundamentally. These social norms. Yeah.
Let's talk about Clubhouse, because it is such an interesting phenomenon for the Iranian community, and quite exceptionally so in my observation in terms of virtually any other community I can think of. First of all, I guess it was about a year ago that Clubhouse became all the rage. How did you first get involved?
Well, actually, a friend of mine, some of my friends actually introduced me and suggested me to just join Clubhouse. And especially it's, empowered, especially within the era, or let's say within the period of presidential election, which was held last June.
The Iranian presidential election.
Yes, Iranian election. Yeah. So it was started from, last March, you could say. And then, within April and May, it was highlighted, you could say.
And you've become something of a Clubhouse hero. I mean, you have a huge following. There's always like thousands of people listening to you. Why is it so suited to you? What do you like about it so much?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think that because I do live in Canada outside of my country of birth, I think that's a good, application, as we talked so far together, for commuting with my audience, both inside and outside of country. And then apart from that, I can play my role to institutionalize the cultural dialogue which we have talked together so far. Just the part which I can do that, the part which I can contribute is trying to being engaged in authentic dialogues and through Clubhouse. Though as you can imagine, I have received a lot of even insults, apart from a lot of positive comments, but I have tried to be patient and polite. The more the better. Yeah.
I have to say, in the beginning, it was this wondrous new development, and it is exciting. You're suddenly in this room with a virtual room with all these people from around the world, and you're having this dialogue. But I did find, and I was only really active in the first few months. The reason I became inactive was because I didn't find it was about dialogue. I felt like there wasn't a lot of listening listening going on, and there wasn't a lot of great conversations. It felt like people, a succession of people just sort of grandstanding and, you know, wanting to promote their whatever they're doing. And I guess for it to have sustained the way it has for you, that either that hasn't been your experience or that Clubhouse has somehow gotten better over the last year. What is the case for you?
I do agree with you. Yeah, it was the case at the beginning for me as well. So it wasn't a kind of dialogue, authentic dialogue, which we have reviewed together today at the beginning. And it was emotional. A lot of emotions were in the space, let's say, and in a destructive way, and insulting, and even sometimes threatening. Yeah, threatening each other, threatening, insulting. They were amongst some of the dialogues. But for me, step by step, it was changed in a way that even I had, with some clerics, I did have some critical debates, let's say, some debates on religious issues like hijab or الزواج السفید یا الزواج عرفی, for instance. And I did have some debates with some atheists as a, the taste, and that was good. That has been good for me. I mean, dialogue and discussing with the ones who do not agree, they right. do not embrace my ideas, but we can dialogue together in a polite and collaborative way. So in a selective way, what I'm saying is that still there are some rooms, you could say, in Clubhouse, which dialogue and with each other is not happening there, but we can avoid them and just go ahead according to our plan. This is what I have done, and this is my own agenda, let's say, currently. Do some, for instance, I mean, within the next few days, I do have another debate on theism and atheism with one of Iranian atheists who lives in the UK, and we have had several sessions so far, several debates so far, 5, 6, 7 debates so far, in a good and constructive way, as far as I can see. And this could enhance the level of communication between, I mean, a lot of Iranians. I do remember it was 4 or 5 months ago that the first debate with me as a theist and my friend who lives in the UK, which happened, and there was huge audience, and the moderator at the beginning, I think who the lady works for BBC in the UK, said that this is the first, or I don't know, less than 5 times that in a professional and polite way, an Iranian theist and Iranian atheist do discuss together. And this is the privilege of Clubhouse. Yeah. And apart from that, there were, for instance, other guys who wanted to behave emotionally and impolitely and even full of resentment when they talk together religiously, politically. This is still the case as well. But as I mentioned, we can go ahead according to our constructive agenda.
But an interesting thing has happened, which is that while Clubhouse has become something of a footnote, if not a joke, to in some circles in the West. I don't want to suggest that it's there aren't people who love it, embrace it, who are non-Iranian, but you hear it in pop culture in the West, for example, where people say, "Oh, remember that thing, Clubhouse, that is now completely over. It's finished. Everybody abandoned it. COVID ended, and people went back outside, and they don't want to have anything to do with Clubhouse." That's not been the case for the Iranian community. Now, the obvious sort of conclusion would be these platforms don't exist in this open a way for Iranians, and that's why it's made such a difference, and that's why Clubhouse remains not just popular, but growing in popularity for the global Iranian community. Do you think that's the reason, that this is an exceptional platform, more so for Iranians that don't have access to each other in any other ways?
Yeah, I do agree with you. Yeah, that this platform has paved the way to talk together, especially amongst the Iranians who live outside of country and inside country. Whenever a phenomenon has got its own effect and function is still there. And the Clubhouse as a platform can play its own effect and function. And this is the way, because the function is there, so I think it's gonna last. I don't know for how long, but
when you say I don't know for how long, let me ask you why you think. I mean, look, the conversation is so open and is so vibrant amongst Iranians on Clubhouse that months ago, I remember friends and colleagues saying, "Oh, the regime is going to, close down Clubhouse any moment because why would they allow this kind of dialogue that hasn't been allowed for 42 years to suddenly take place?" Why do you think the Iranian government hasn't shut Clubhouse down?
Two things. Firstly, I don't know what's going to happen in the future if it is called as Tarh Siyanat, internet Tarh Siyanat, which is talked about a lot in the parliament. If it's approved and if it's applied, I don't know what's going to happen afterwards, both for Instagram and Clubhouse and other applications and platforms. Secondly, I hope so. I don't know. I hope so. The securities has arrived at this kind of attitude, and I could say, being wise, that let us see what is being discussed openly, as far as it's not dangerous, or as far as it's not affect our security concretely speaking. So let us see what is happening and what people are talking about and watching it and observing it. I hope so. The second thing, that was the reason which it was not filtered at the beginning, as you mentioned, or closed down. Hopefully there are some specialists among security forces that, okay, let's just open it up just to see what are the issues which, someone wanted to talk, because it's just a virtual. It's just virtual, and they just talk together. It's not networking in terms of, for instance, they are not managing demonstration and so on and so forth, because it's not networking.
Although they've used it, they've used it as well, right? There's been government officials who've gone on Clubhouse and made declarations, and
even some of the ministers, they join Clubhouse or from time to time. They take part in some of the sessions.
So it's such a pleasure to get to talk to you. I hope this can be the beginning of a dialogue that we'll do more of. But before I let you go, you said something in an earlier conversation I had with you before we did this interview that was quite heartening for me, if true, where you said that you thought that Clubhouse has actually facilitated more dialogue or understanding within the Iranian community over the last year, and you were so used to things getting worse all the time that it was nice to hear something positive. Do you want to reflect on that as a final moment here?
Yeah, I think so. This is my impression, my own experience, that I think there are some constructive and promising discussions, as I refer to some of them in our today's dialogue, that for me, they have been useful and constructive, amongst others. That, for instance, I have seen and I've experienced, unlike the destructive comments which me and others have received in this platform, and I think we have to ignore them and try to highlight and empower the power of critical thinking at the end of the day, as we discussed at the beginning. This is where my optimism comes from there.
Dr. Soroush Dabbagh, it's been a great pleasure. I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for your invitation.
Khodafis.
Khodafis.
That is the Iranian philosopher, scholar, author, therapist, Dr. Soroush Dabbagh. You can find him on Clubhouse with large rooms of people listening to him. Dr. Soroush Dabbagh joined us from Mississauga, Ontario today. Microphones back on for Smart Pega and Groovy Shaya. So he's quite optimistic about Clubhouse, first of all.
Very.
What did you think of that, Pega? You were kind of...
I mean, my personal experience on Clubhouse, and, you know, like everybody else over the course of the pandemic, I spent a fair bit of time on Clubhouse, and I didn't feel so optimistic at the end. I mean, a lot of times the conversation led to shouting matches and people being thrown out of the room by moderators, and you know, it wasn't really...
He seems to be suggesting that over time it is creating a space for more understanding. But yeah, I mean, the Iranian community does not seem a lot less polemical all of a sudden.
Yeah, but I think it is something that, you know, you can learn over time, and maybe over the course of the last 2 years and since the pandemic, people have kind of learned how to engage in dialogue and conversation in a platform like Clubhouse.
What did you think of that thought about Clubhouse?
It's interesting because when you walk through Clubhouse and you go randomly to a Persian club, it's usually yelling, hey, and when you go to a non-Persian Clubhouse, it's like very calm, that you think that it's really interesting. But I think I agree with Dr. Dabbagh. I'm optimistic in terms of Clubhouse here, because it really, I mean, I've seen that it really helps some people to learn to communicate. You know, at the beginning, even they didn't mute their microphone,
Right.
but now they know that.
That was everyone, to be fair. We were trying to figure out how this Clubhouse works. But
now, I mean, I've seen the result that people gradually learn to listen, and then
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to a couple of popular comedians who were on Clubhouse a lot in the beginning and are not as much anymore, and they had the opposite view, that it was this great, for a few months it was had a great moment, and now it just kind of descends into you know, petty arguments or stuff. So but you know, you can't argue with thousands of people being in a room and there being a platform for people to talk to each other. I thought I'm still processing or digesting what the conversation we just had with Dr. Dabbagh. I feel like he said something that is so simple on the face of it, but it was kind of a eureka moment for me, where he said, like, we basically, Iranians have a lot of trouble with accepting or admitting fallibility, like to admit that you're wrong. Like he said a part of critical thinking and part of dialogue is to go into an opinion or a conversation with accepting the possibility that you might not always be right, that you might not be right.
Yes.
And that was so, it really resonated with me, because when I think about it, unfortunately, I do think that that's a quality that I see in a lot of Iranians, just an inability to you know, say that you're wrong, you know, an inability to kind of climb down from any opinion, political or otherwise.
It's also because we're so prideful, I feel like. We have so much pride that it almost is difficult also for us to accept or admit that we are wrong.
Yeah. But which is weird, because they're not, they don't have to be interlinked. I mean, you can have a lot of pride in being Iranian or whatever, and still be able to go, maybe I'm wrong about sanctions or whatever it is, you know?
Yeah.
The highlight actually, I have a question later I will ask from you, but the highlight for me was the question that you asked Dr. Dabbagh about the revolution. It was amazing, you know.
Yeah.
That
Isn't it the ultimate exercise in critical thinking?
I said no.
Well, his answer was so quick. He was.
Immediate.
I really liked the way he deconstructed it. Said no, it's not. It's not critical thinking, or, you know, kind of accepting that we were wrong when you do it omnibus. When what he said was basically, it's a fundamental. Everything's wrong. Everything's if there's no nuance to it. There's no. Although he seems to be saying critical thinking, which I've only ever grown up thinking is a great thing, he ties it to reformism, to you know, thinking that things need to be reformed rather than, and that's in some circles a bad word in the Iranian community, right?
That was my aha moment, actually. I thought the same way. I still kind of think that critical thinking is a positive, but when he started to bring up reform and the fact that that negative connotation. It was kind of like, it made me think about, whether or not.
But it makes sense that if you're, that part of critical thinking is accepting that nothing is ever 100% right, or that you always, so that a step-by-step approach is the salient way forward in any scenario, and presumably in wanting regime change or something. But I felt like that was his. Well, who knows? I mean, I thought the piece about critical thinking was a bit sad, and maybe will be insulting for some Iranians listening. But to be honest, I hear this every day from Parisa and Hitar, folks who've come from Iran, in the last 20 or 30 years, where when we were doing the Contemporary History of Iran series, well, they'll say, "Look, we were never told about this." What? You were never told about how Reza Shah did these things? No, never told about that.
Yeah.
And we were never told that there might be a different perspective on this. That's really sad.
Yes.
I mean, that goes to the education system and
Yeah.
And even in the class, when you say in the second grade, if you ask a question, back in that time, I don't know about right now. Like back in the time when I was in the second grade, if I have a question and I ask a question, I would get punished.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, that's tragic.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's the exact opposite of what of the way it should be, or at least the exact opposite of the way things were awarded here. And by the time you get into a liberal arts education in university or something, asking questions is the point.
It's
Yeah.
so encouraged.
Like that's the idea. That's what education is,
No,
right?
they teach you that پرسیدن بهتر از ندانستن است. But when you ask, they would punish. Oh, what's the question? Silent and
It depends on what you were asking.
no.
What did you think about what he had to say about Tarof? Which was that he said it's mostly always a bad thing.
I kind of like Tarof, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes back to what we were saying earlier about being poetic, and the way that we speak being kind of poetic. I think it's so ingrained in our culture, and it can be a beautiful thing, but sometimes if it's to the extreme, then I think I would agree with what he was saying. But as a general, I don't think it's necessarily always a bad thing.
Well, he didn't say it was always a bad thing, but it sounds like you think it's mostly a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has limits. Like I've been in situations for sure where I've been like, oh my God, I've had enough of this. But I think to a certain point, it's
See,
respect.
to me that this is a whole other episode we have to do, obviously. But to me, Tarof, it's the same. It falls into it's like being ghairati. It's the same falls in the same category where it's like the dialogue around it is, oh, we shouldn't be Tarofi. This is a bad thing. But ultimately, there, at least in my family growing up, there was some valor in being Tarofi.
Exactly.
Like it's like it's kind of insulting if you're not Tarofi.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was saying.
This person came and they didn't, and they asked for seconds. They should have said, no, I could never eat more. Like, they didn't ask to do the dishes. And it's like, well, I thought you wanted that. I thought you wanted honesty, It's like, so, yeah.
It's a fine line, but yeah, again, I think it goes back to the concept of respect, and it's so ingrained more than anything else. I think it's hard to look at it as a negative.
I really wish it's a very challenging idea that if we accept the question today that are Iranians lousy at dialogue, if the answer to that is yes, basically at the end of it, that's a tough one. That's a big mountain to climb.
Yeah. So I have a question from you. So
Yes.
you've interviewed 1,000 people.
Yes.
And it's been 2 years that you.
I've interviewed a lot more than 1,000 people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure, go ahead. I got the point.
Do you know actually the exact number? How many interviews?
No, but I would say thousands probably. Yeah.
Thousands. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's been 2 years that you're interviewing mostly Iranian
Correct.
people. So, and interviews.
Although I interviewed Iranians in the past, but not exclusively. Yeah.
And so interview is a kind of a dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So how
With hope. I hope it would be. Yes.
so how did you see the difference between interviewing forget about the language barrier
That's
like
such a good question, actually.
Well, first of all, I cannot forget about the language barrier, because I believe that if English is your second language, I've certainly observed this with Iranians, oftentimes the same Iranian, especially who has a great facility for poetic language, etc., in Persian, will necessarily not be able to speak around a question or an idea, skirt around it in poetic ways when they're speaking in English, because it's a second or third or fourth language.
Yeah.
So the upshot of that is that they'll tend to be a lot more direct. You know, I don't know if Shahnoush Parsipur is. I don't know how indirect or whatever she would be in Persian, but she's an amazing, great author and speaker who could speak in very sophisticated ways in Persian. But if you say, you know, was the regime evil, you know, in English, she's like, yes, they were. You know, I mean, it's like it's very direct, you know, or whatever. So that's one thing. The language does make a difference.
But in terms of like listening to your question and answering your question instead of telling their story, you know,
I'm not sure that this kind of forum and the kind of guests that we have on would be an accurate sample of what we're actually talking about. You know,
yes,
people are kind of on their best behavior or trying to look good, or you know, they know what they're going to say. And there's the interviews that have gone south in the last couple of years with Iranians. There's just as many that I've had that with non-Iranians that, you know. So I don't think I don't think this would be the right sample size. Sample of. But I do observe in everything from Clubhouse to Persian media to the Kababi to going to one of those galas, the breakdown of dialogue seems so accelerated. You know, the lack of communication, or couples who are qar with each other, or something like that. There's so much drama, you know, passion and drama, and you know. I mean, to state the obvious. So again, I mean, though one doesn't want to descend into stereotypes, I can just feel we're going to get some letters about this. Why are you so negative about Iranians? And it's like, well, we're trying to have a dialogue about our issues. Since we're talking to each other here, if we're only just celebrating and banging the drum, then where do we get?
But that's what leads to growth, I think. The fact that we can actually bring these negatives up as well. And I just wanted to add one thing when you were talking about the language. I was thinking of the interview with Alireza Ghorbani. And I've listened to interviews that he's done in Farsi. And as you were saying that, I was thinking of the difference between the way he was speaking. And it's
although he admirably was speaking English, and he's very direct in English. Can't be anything else.
Exactly.
It's going to be very direct. You know, when you said it's a good thing, these things like the debate around I don't know if people around the world necessarily know, but there was going to be a soccer game with Iran playing in Canada, a friendly soccer game, and a lot of Iranians in Canada were offended by that and said, we don't want this game here. And so the game was canceled. But there's been a debate in the community about whether it should be canceled or not. You know, the most important part of that feels like that would be a great opportunity. Like, what a great opportunity to talk about how we feel as a community, what we think is right or not. And to be fair, there were some great contributions. There were some great posts I saw in social media where people really expressed, look, this is where I've come to on this. This is why I support the game, and all the emotions and thoughts I've been through, and somebody else saying, here's how I've worked it out, and I really don't think it's a good idea that this game should be played in Canada, and I think it's a problem. And in that sense, it's such a great opportunity. It's unfortunately I also saw a lot of the other stuff, which is just somebody being shamed for having bought a ticket to the game, or somebody yelling at the other person saying, "Why would you cancel a game that I want to go to?" or what. And that's the part where I hope we can grow from. But
more opportunity for open dialogue, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah. Well, you know where the place for that is.
Clubhouse.
No, I was going to say Rook, but yes, basically. Thank you very much, Smart Pega.
Thank you.
Thank you, Groovy Shia. To be continued. We will continue this dialogue about dialogue. Hopefully, this is full time for Rook for today. If you want to check out any of our previous episodes or any of our other programs, our guests, our outtakes, video, all of our video, rookmedia.com is the place. Our website, rookmedia.com. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together each week. Savvy Roham, talented Anahita, Ponce the artist, the fabulous Keon, Super Patty Sauce, Smart Pega, Alay Mertad, Captain Reza, and Groovy Shia. Thank you to all of you out there for supporting us and sharing our content. Please subscribe if you've not done so already. If you know somebody who might like what we do here at Rook Media, share it. Let them know about it. Send them episodes. And you can reach us at info@rookmedia.com at any time too, or as well as posting on our platforms. Find me on Instagram at Jian Ghomeshi. Mizumbashi.